Hey Seekers, just a heads up. This episode features candid discussion about postmortem care, the physical realities of death, and funeral industry practices. We speak with a licensed mortician about what happens to the body after death, including processes like embalming and body preparation. While these details are shared with respect and education in mind, they may be emotionally or physically sensitive for some listeners. Please care for your well-being as you listen, and take a break if you need to. We'll be here. Hey, Seekers, and welcome to the Hanged Woman podcast. I'm your host, Julian Irons, and I cannot tell you how excited I am to be hanging with y'all today. So, if you've had a chance to listen to the last two episodes, you know that this theme is a heavy one, because we're getting a perspective shift on death, dying, and the afterlife. So the first two episodes, we sat down with death doula Kim Stravers. Kim walked us through all the practical steps of what we need to do to prepare for our own deaths. And she also helped to explain the dying process and helped us relieve the anxiety that some of us have around dying. And next week, we're sitting down with medium Rachel Arenbazio. Rachel's going to talk to us about the afterlife and help us answer the question, does it really exist? But before we cross into the unseen, let's pause and ground into the physical. So picture this. You've just died and your body is getting wheeled into the morgue. You get all zipped up nice and cozy into one of those black body bags, and then rolled into a refrigerated morgue door, which I just learned are called mortuary cabinets. But what actually happens to our bodies when we die? And what happens between the time of death and the time when our family sees our body at the wake? This week on the Hanged Woman podcast, we're diving into the science of death, and we're joined by Joél Simone Maldonado, also known as the Grave Woman. She is transforming the death care industry by centering black bodies, reclaiming ancestral knowledge, and demystifying what actually happens when we die. So get ready, because this is going to be quite the ride. Welcome to the Hanged Woman podcast, where perspective is power. Let's get into it. Hey, fellow seekers. I'm taking a quick pause from the show to share something really close to my heart, and honestly, the only reason you're even listening to this podcast right now. It's Three of Cups. My sisters and I created Three of Cups, an Iron Sisters mission of love, as a space for healing, beauty, growth, and community, because we believe life is meant to be full, rich, and abundant in every way. We offer all kinds of ways to support you, like energy healing, heart-centered art, plant-based medicinals, even marketing that will help enhance your brand's presence in the world. Because wherever you are in your journey, we want to help you feel seen, supported, and empowered. So if you're looking for something to help fill your cup in whatever way you need, come join us. Follow us on Instagram at Three of Cups Healing, or explore all of our offerings at threeofcupshealing.com. Because Seeker, your cup deserves to be full. And now, back to the episode. I'm so happy to be sitting here with you right now. I find you absolutely fascinating. I find your brain fascinating, and I find your work really fascinating.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
First, can you just tell us a little bit about you, a little bit about your history?
Okay. First things first, my name is Joél Simone Maldonado. Professionally, I am known as the Grave Woman. I am a licensed funeral director, embalmer, educator, sacred grief practitioner, and the founder of the Multicultural Death and Grief Care Academy, where we focus on cultural intelligence and cultural competency in end of life, death, and grief care. History, I was born in England. I was raised here in Beaufort, South Carolina. Amazing family, pretty much amazing childhood. I graduated from high school with my certification as a master barber, which is a combination between master hair care and cosmetology. And from there, I went on to college in Atlanta, Georgia. And from there into working in a cemetery. And my path led me to going to mortuary school, where I graduated from Gupton Jones in 2012. And the rest is literally history.
Wow. So I want to start here with the science behind dying. Can you walk us through what physically happens to a body the moments and days after death?
Absolutely. And I want to preface this by saying that a lot of times we tend to look at death as a distant friend or a distant relative, right? but death is always a constant companion. Death walks beside us throughout our entirety, from the time we're conceived until the time that we experience this cessation of life. And by that, literally, right now, you and I are in the dying process. Our cells are dying, our bodies are getting older. We are slowing down in time and space if we're looking at that metaphysically, or we're accelerating towards the Big Bang or the explosion, which is death, right? But to answer it more on a common level, after someone is pronounced dead or experiences what we call somatic death, which is the cessation of our brain function, our heart function, and our lung function, those things lead to death. And we experience that in a variety of ways, either through sickness, accident, trauma, sudden shock. There's literally a million ways to die, if not more. But here in this country, in our predominant culture, what happens is that the people that have not only the authority, and I use that word authority not as in power, but in knowledge and understanding of how to care for death, are called. And a lot of times that is the funeral director, maybe the police and fire department, or the coroner, and we are taken into their custody depending on the manner in which we pass away, because there's language is so important around this. You have manner of death, cause of death, and death. Manner of death meaning how we die. If we're in a car accident, if we're in a hospital bed, cause of death, trauma from said accident, or trauma or result of illness. We may be taken to the medical examiner's office or the coroner, where an autopsy may be performed. And that autopsy then reveals that cause of death. That's where that language is important. If that isn't the case, a lot of times people are taken into the custody of the funeral home, where, depending on culture, faith, religion, personal preference, you'll be cared for in a variety of ways. One of which may be the most common that people are aware of is embalmed, meaning that your blood is removed from your body through the embalming process, through your vascular system. Incisions are made at various points throughout the body, depending on the condition, cause, and manner of death, that will best serve to preserve and present your body back to your loved ones or communities, if that's your choice. The embalming process also involves something called setting features, where, if we think about it in Hollywood terms, a lot of times people die so peacefully. They just die so gracefully, and their eyes are closed and they have a cute little pout and maybe a smile, right? That is totally anti-nature and anti-gravity. We die a lot of times with our eyes wide open and our mouths a lot of times hanging uncontrollably open, because our muscle function has ceased to exist, meaning that we are now subject to whatever gravity decides. Our muscles keep our mouth open. That's no longer working. Now our mouths are open. Setting features involves things like closing our eyes and giving us that natural closed eye appearance, closing our mouths and making sure that when people come and look at us for the last time, they're not literally looking down our throat. And I'm laughing because the way that we see death without going behind the scenes is so interesting to me. It involves things like making incisions a lot of times in the neck or collar area, in the arms, if necessary, in the thighs. And I'm not using medical terminology here because I want people to understand where these incisions may be made, or towards our ankles, depending on the conditions of our bodies, right? Most times in our neck and collar. And making those incisions and then closing those incisions. That's vascular embalming. So your vascular systems are your veins and your arteries, how your blood moves through your body. Then you have cavity embalming, where we use what's called a trocar. If any of you have seen plastic surgery, it's the same similar tool that they use to suction fat from those areas that we want a little bit more snatched. We're using maybe a little bit longer trocar to embalm and get embalming fluid into the organs. So there's a hose, but then that hose is attached to a long, looks like needle, And so that needle is used to aspirate, and aspirate means to remove by reverse water pressure your fluid from your organs, your stomach matter, your urine from your bladder, fluid and liquid that may be in your intestines. Like that tool is used to remove body from fluid from our cavities in our bodies. If someone has an autopsy, a lot of times their organs, depending on whether it's a full autopsy or a partial autopsy, partial meaning just the brain or a certain area of the body, full meaning the skull cap is removed, the Y incision is made, and the cavity is exposed, rib cage removed, cavity exposed, and those organs are dissected and investigated individually. So, a lot of times in the funeral home, if someone has had a full autopsy, those organs are returned to us in a bag separate from the body. And so that cavity embalming is not necessary in that case. However, we do treat those organs separately and then gently place that bag or whatever receptacle they're returned in within the body. Yes. And when I say returned in the body, we're not piecing things back together like a puzzle. It's a bag, maybe a biohazard bag, and that bag is placed back inside the cavity. And the two flaps of skin that remain from the Y incision are then sewn back together.
Is there a scientific reason why I put it back in, or do we do that because it's out of respect for the person who's passed?
A lot of times it's for respect. And if for some reason that bag can't be placed back inside of that person for another reason, it will be placed at the foot of whatever their burial container is, whether it's a casket, a cremation box, it'll be placed at the foot of that box if for some reason it's not able to be placed back inside. And so I'm sharing this and going into detail about this because, not to be traumatic, I just want people to understand that there's a lot of work that goes into returning your loved one to you in a way that is not only presentable but palatable, and that is aesthetically pleasing. Another component, once that embalming process is done, for many people that are being viewed or going to have a viewing at their service, their family is going to see them, is the cosmetic side, meaning that we do your makeup, we care for you. We also cleanse people's bodies, we give people baths, we wash their hair, we clean their nails, we clean their ears, we clean their nose, we make sure that there are no eye boogers. The same thing that you would do to your body as a human being, waking up in the morning and getting yourself ready for the day, those same details are done to prepare you to be presented back to your community, to be cremated, to be buried. And professionals like myself do that work, and we do that for every person that comes into our care, unless otherwise specified. Now, I'm not saying we do the embalming process. I'm not saying everyone has the same exact embalming procedure, even though the procedure is scientific. The condition of the body, again, that manner, that cause, and that condition are important. And they dictate how we're able to care for them and the way that we go about caring for them. People don't just get up and get in the casket. We have to literally, either with a mechanical lift or with physical manpower, lift them into their caskets after they're dressed, putting their clothes on, their socks, their shoes, their underwear, their belts, their bras, their jewelry. We put these things on people. And so I want people to understand that there's so much care that goes into this. So, a lot of times, especially in traumatic deaths, we have to do what's called restorative arts, right? If someone has been shot in the head, if there's been an accident, there's been trauma of any kind, maybe someone had cancer that ate away a part of their face, they were attacked by an animal, and now there's obvious trauma. We have to repair that if we're going to present that person back to their community and to their loved ones. And through the use of mortuary waxes, through plasters, through becoming ingenuitive and using things that sometimes we may not think would be used to put someone's face back together or stabilize a broken arm or a compound fracture. We use those things to restore as much of a natural appearance as possible imagine using a wax, right? A lot of waxes come in beige or brown or white colors. Ours come in pinks and beiges. And so there's a lot of color theory in matching skin tones and complexions and undertones, being specific about lip liners so that we don't make people look overly animated. Even something as simple as closing the eyes. You just close your eyes. It's so natural to you. But there's literally a formula to closing someone's eyes when they've passed away. Number one, because the eyes are open, we have to make sure that they're going to remain closed. It's really old school, but people used to use Aran Alpha, which is super glue, to basically line the bottom lash line and then close the eye, but the eye is closed. So the formula for that is that 2/3 of the eye is coming down and 1/3 is coming up to give that natural appearance. Or knowing how to close someone's mouth so that they don't look like this. Like, how unsettling would that be? And so either through suturing Aran Alpha or honestly with what we call a needle gun, we can close someone's mouth through injecting wires below the teeth and above the teeth in the gum line, and then twisting two wires together to close the mouth, or through suturing through the bottom of your jaw, coming up through under your nose, going back down, and then suturing the mouth closed. There's so much science and effort that goes into it.
You talked about how you would have to use something perhaps unique in order to put somebody's physical features back together. Can you give us an example of something that stands out to you that you've done before?
I can give you several examples, but I think the most gentle example and the most responsible example would be styrofoam. Using styrofoam to reshape breasts that maybe were lost due to mastectomy, or tissue, cotton, to stuff a bra like we did when we were teenagers. There are other things, but I would prefer not to get into those things because I don't want to give the wrong impression about the work that we do.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about the science of what happens to our body when we die. The moments before death, the moments of death, and the moments right after death. What is happening to our bodies?
I'm going to answer this question to the best of my ability. I'm not a pathologist or a medical professional, but from what I understand, there are certain things that do happen, and I'll focus on the post-death side if that's okay. There's something called algal algar, where basically our bodies heat up shortly after death. There've been studies where people have used those heat sensor lenses. What are they called? I can't remember right now. But where almost like how snakes see, where they see heat, not necessarily items. And so there's been research done that show that our bodies literally heat up from the inside out. And to me, that puts me, again, when I describe death as that accelerating towards that explosion or big bang, almost like a star, it explodes. I feel like that's our cells releasing all of our energy back out into the cosmos or into the world in some way. There's also something called lividity, where our blood pools at the it's pooled based on gravity. So let's say I passed away in this chair right now. I'd probably lean over and fall forward or backwards or sideways, but all the blood is going to pool in the direction of gravity. So there'll be some blood, a lot of blood rush to my feet because it's no longer circulating through my body. My heart isn't working anymore. My heart's not pumping. It's not, your heart is basically creating anti-gravity in your body. So it's no longer pumping the body through my face, through my hands. There'll be a lot of blood collected at my fingertips because they'll be hanging down. And if I fall forward, my face will probably be dark if they pick me up from, or when they pick me up. If I fall forward onto this computer, the blood that's in my head will rush towards like wherever my head is laying. A lot of people think that all of our bodily functions cease upon death, but I've picked people up, and when you move them, they pass gas. They use the bathroom on themselves because our muscles are no longer contracting and holding these things in place, holding our functions in place. People make what's called the death rattle, which happens before and after death. And it's basically air escaping our wind, like our escaping our throat and our windpipes and our larynx, and it's coming up and it's coming out. Sometimes it sounds like gurgling. It can be very unnerving when you're in the van and you're hearing Mr. Johnson in the back and you hit a speed bump or his body is rattling around back there. And I say rattling around, I don't mean it how it sounds, but moving based on what's happening around him. And you're hearing sounds. And it's okay, where'd that come from? Or you're like, oh my gosh, what is that smell? It's gas and God knows what else coming out. We also take on, after a certain period of time, I know people talk about their loved ones being cold to the touch. We take on the temperature of the environment around us a lot of times, especially after we've been refrigerated, which is a method of slowing down decomposition. We take on the environment. So when you're saying my loved one feels cold, it's maybe not necessarily that they're cold. You're not used to feeling the actual temperature of the room on someone's body because that heat from our body is always moving because our heart is always pumping. We're moving and creating energy.
Are there any things that our mortician does that the average person does not know about?
There's so many things that morticians do that the average person doesn't know about. And they're not necessarily what you think. Sometimes we tell people no, that we don't think it's a good idea you see your loved one, maybe in the condition that they're in. Not because we don't want you to see your loved one, but because we care about the way you remember them. And ultimately, the choice is yours. But yeah, we do that. We hold babies for people that maybe need to view their loved one alone and without having to worry about holding their baby, or they're shaking so much because they're afraid of what they're going to see. We'll just say, you want me to hold the baby? We hand babies to their moms to hold one more time. And as difficult as that sounds, there's not been one time that I have handed a baby to their mom to hold one last time and they've regretted it. They've been terrified to do it, but so glad that they did in the end. One of my students told me, we were talking about working with difficult families, and she said something so beautiful to me. She said, I worked with this family and the wife complained about everything, his tie, his hairbrush, the way his hair was brushed, his expression. And she said, what I did was I handed her the brush and said, you show me how to take care of him. You've taken care of him every day for the last few years and for the last however many years of your marriage. And no one is going to know how to care for him like you do. So you show me. So I say that to say we relinquish control and put you in the driver's seat. We feed people, literally taking food or bringing food into the office when we realize that someone's not eaten for days because they're grief stricken. We deliver the news sometimes that people's loved ones have passed away if they're calling the funeral home looking for them or calling around and saying, I heard this person passed away, but I haven't been able to confirm it. Are they in your care? In cases like that, there are some follow-up questions because of course we don't want to give people who shouldn't have certain information, either that we don't have the authority to give or that the family does not want them to have. So sometimes we have to break the news to people, which is never fun. There's so many things that we do. We're flower arrangers. We're seamstresses and tailors. And for that, sometimes we have to readjust and customize people's clothes in order to make them fit. For example, people pass away from disease and have been sick for a long time, and maybe the family just can't afford to buy a new suit, or this was their favorite suit. They wore it to our wedding, they wore it on our last vacation, whatever. I know we buried my grandfather in the tuxedo that he wore for my grandparents' 50th anniversary. And he was swollen due to being on life support after he passed away. And so I'm confident that maybe some alterations were made to the suit that he wore. We're hairdressers, we're makeup artists, we're mad scientists. We wear so many hats, and that's just off the top of my head. We're counselors, we listen, we're confidants. I can't tell you how many times people have come in when someone died and said, who am I going to be mad at now? This person abused me when I was a child. They raped me, they sexually molested me, and I've never told a soul. And that doesn't leave my office, or it has never left my office attached to that person's name. Or we're security sometimes when a wife finds out her husband had a girlfriend or a boyfriend.
Oh no, this needs to be a television show.
There's so many different.
Where's Tyler Perry at?
There's so many things that we do.
Okay, Seekers, I think this is a really great place to take a break. We'll be right back with the episode. Hey, Seekers. So, healing isn't always pretty, but you don't have to do it alone. Temperance Energy Healing offers intuitive energy work to support you through life's biggest transitions, grief, change, and beyond. Whether you're navigating loss or simply seeking alignment, Temperance offers grounded support with care, clarity, compassion, and non-judgment. We offer in-person sessions in Marina Del Rey and Valley Glen, or remote sessions if you're outside the LA area. Book a session, remember who you are, and fill your cup at threeofcupshealing.com. I sit here listening to you talk about this, and I can't help but feel a little bit envious that you weren't the one to take care of. My sister Jasmine and I were the ones responsible for going to make sure that she was viewable for her children, and she wasn't. And there were so many things that I wanted to fix. I said something to the funeral director at the funeral parlor, and I was like, she doesn't look like her. Her skin is like 10 times darker. The wig looks crooked. I could tell her dress was stuffed. And so everything just looked wrong. And I wish that I had somebody like you that takes all the care that you take in caring for people, both the deceased and their loved ones. So I'd really admire you for that.
That is probably one of the most unique compliments I've ever had. Thank you.
Let's get into embalming. So where and how did embalming actually start?
Embalming started in ancient Egypt, and their motivation for embalming was circled around what they believed to be the circle of necessity, which was a 3,000-year journey to and around the sun and back. And they believed that in order to reanimate into their roles, embalming in that time was reserved for pharaohs and very rich people. Okay. And so they believed that in order to reanimate back into this life or their lifetime or their consciousness, that their bodies needed to be intact. And so they created a way to preserve the bodies. And they did so using things like honey and essential oils and salts, like very green burial type stuff, right? No chemicals that were not found in nature, let me say, because there are chemicals in nature. And so they did this and they erected these huge mortuary towers or monuments, the mortuary temple of Horus. Like those are where their bodies were kept. And they believed that when they made this 3,000-year circle of necessity journey to, around, and back from the sun, that they would reanimate into their human form, which is why they put so much care into not only preserving, but wrapping and decorating the sarcophagus, which are like the most badass caskets I've ever seen in my life. But these big monuments, think the two things that were outside of the funeral home where Whitney Houston had her funeral, if you've never seen one. And that should be a pretty easy image to Google. A lot of times they were made of wood or marble. And so they were very heavy, very expensive. They would hire people who dedicated their lives to painting these sarcophagi. And there were people who lived in an area called the necropolis, which is where the dead were taken care of, that did nothing. They did not interact with regular society because their work was thought to be that sacred. That's all they did was care for the dead. mummifying the dead and practicing the ancient arts. And I'm sitting here looking across the room at the Egyptian Book of the Dead. But yeah, that was what they did. Fast forward, embalming was explored throughout the world, but in our culture here in the United States, it was a very important part of the Civil War because soldiers were being killed away from home. Generals were being killed away from home. Abraham Lincoln was killed away from home. And as president, they wanted to take his body on a tour. And so they developed what's now the modern embalming process using things like embalming fluid and restoration as we practice it today to an extent. Unique thing about embalming here in the United States, a lot of times those that worked in furniture stores making things like beds and chairs were responsible for making caskets and providing funerals and caring for the deceased. It is my opinion, being from the South, being from within an hour of where the Civil War started, that a lot of the slaves that came from certain parts of Africa that may have studied in ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt, and their lineage taught them certain practices about those things, were responsible for the embalmings that took place initially here in the United States. I do not have documentation or research to prove that, but my common sense and internal intuition tell me that.
How does embalming actually work? How does it preserve the body? How long does it last?
We talked about the vascular system, right? And so embalming has three principal objectives. Number one is to disinfect, to preserve, and to present, right? Or to return like presentation to make you look better, like the aesthetics of it. And I say look better, look as best as you can, not necessarily better. So, number one, disinfection. We're cleaning the body. When we begin to decompose, that is considered a biohazard. A lot of our embalming licenses come through the Board of Health because it is a health concern. That was why Egypt was wiped off the map, ancient Egypt. They were embalming and dumping dead bodies into the Nile River, which contaminated the water system, which killed the people. Disinfection, providing that biohazard caution and that biohazard care for the general community, right? Number two is to preserve. We're stopping the decomposition process to the best of our ability, meaning that we're taking the blood and other fluids out of the body and we're replacing it with a preservative. And that's the third thing. I'm saying restore, but it's preserve. Preservative chemical or agent that is going to help preserve your body. And then that fourth step, not the third step, is presentation, presenting you back to your community. So that's where the restorative art and the cosmetics and the aesthetics come in. That's all embalming is. Now, there's a scientific method, and that method varies. The chemicals that we use varies based on that manner, that cause, and the condition of the body that we talked about before. But those principal things, that disinfection, that preservation, and that restoration and presentation are the four keys.
How has science changed the way we handle dead bodies over the years? Are there new innovations that have helped shift the way we care for dead bodies? What are the changes that you've seen or that you're aware of?
I think we're returning, I see it like a circle. I don't think that there's like this new technology that is changing the way that we care for dead bodies, right? Like embalming might be that technology, the way we do it, the chemicals we use, where we source those chemicals from may change and evolve over time, but the procedures are still the same because we're still humans, right? We still have vascular systems, we still have skin, we still have hair, right? What's interesting to me is that we're returning more to nature, meaning green burial is becoming a thing, eco-friendly. Death doulas are now like the rave. And it's interesting because none of these things are new. This is what we did. This is how we took care of bodies and people when they died. as way back as when the first person died. Like, I guarantee you, the first person that ever died, depending on your faith and your culture, that person's name may differ, but they weren't embalmed. They may have been, if they were aware enough, covered with something, some sort of ceremony done. If they were sick, cared for by other humans that may have been around them. If they weren't with other humans, maybe by the animals that were around them. I don't know. But they were left to decompose in the earth. And so now, fast forward, if you believe in linear time, to 2025, where we're now telling people, oh, did you know you can have a green burial without embalming, without this, without that? We've always been able to do that. We're just marketing it differently now. There are some cool innovations, like, and I don't even know if the word is innovative. There are more earth themed options like terramation, which is basically human composting, returning someone to the soil. From dust we come in, from dust we shall return, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And so there's a process, a 90-day process that will take your physical form, my physical form, and turn me into soil. And I think that's amazing. There are different brand names for it, but it's composting. How natural is that? How ancient is that? Think about what enslaved people were brought here to do, right? The things that our enslavers thought were below them, were beneath them. Think about death and your reaction to, maybe, and we're talking about civil war here. We're talking about a Black person that is enslaved passing away. A white person would have not cared at all. The enslaver would have not, that would not have been a priority. It would have been, get him out the way. And so the thing that enslaved people did and believed, let's talk about that core belief. If someone is of Gullah Geechee culture, homecoming has a different connotation for me, right? Or homegoing. It's the belief that death is the only escape from the turmoils of enslavement. Death is the only chance my soul and my spirit and my non-physical body have of returning to that which from which I've come, which is home, the ancestral plane, Africa, a place that an enslaved person, after that first generation of people that were brought here, have no physical concept of, right? And so, as an enslaved, I imagine, as a slave owner, and one of my slaves drops dead from maybe heat exhaustion or being bit by a snake, or after childbirth and not having any type of medical attention or care, my concern is not what happens to their body. It's get them out of the way and get to work. And so think about what funerals and memorials may have looked like for those enslaved people. That was the only time where they were allowed to congregate unsupervised, because our enslavers didn't want to be bothered with us. We were already viewed as disgusting and less than and subhuman. So our dead bodies had no value. So enslaved people, with that belief of they've escaped, they've made it, they've transitioned, they're going home, that's a celebratory time. And so I think the main thing that speaks to that cultural nuance, that speaks to that, what we celebrate now is homegoing service, that speaks to that thing that makes us okay and able to go on after someone dies on a deep spiritual core level, is the way that we care for their bodies when they die. And if this is the only time that myself and people that may or may not speak in my same language or tongue, but we all have this deeply rooted understanding of what death or cessation of life is, then we take that as an opportunity to celebrate collectively and to rejoice collectively and to show someone the care that they would get never in life, but only through death. And so let's fast forward and talk about the cultural nuance that exists now in death care. So, part of the reason, or the main reason I started the Multicultural Death and Grief Care Academy, is because we're almost at that same place again, where we don't have enslavers anymore. We have an industry that is predominantly run by old white men. And because that is the case, the attention to my hair, the attention to my cosmetics, the attention to my restorative arts that I talked about before, the attention to the ways that chemicals interact with my body differently than they may interact with my Anglo-Saxon counterparts or my Asian counterparts or other non colored or non BIPOC communities is not a forethought. It's not priority. It's not talked about in our standard education system. And so when I went to mortuary school, there was no conversation about any of those things. We learned how to take care of white people, Jewish people, Catholic people, and talked a little bit about the Mormons. And so I'm sitting in class thinking, what about the people that look and pray like me? What about the people who aren't Christian? What about the people who practice ATRs or that have curly or textured hair? We're not going to learn how to do any of that. And remember, I graduated high school as a master barber. And so these things are second nature to me. But even my Black counterparts in school or my Black colleagues in school had no idea what to do with our hair or about shrinkage or about detangling or about honoring the spiritual essence of locks. It was foreign. And so that was very frustrating for me. And so what I started doing was being put in positions with professionals that were supposed to be training me, either in school or on the job, that were making a lot more money to me. I started having to train them and teach them or educate them about all of these differences and ways to care for and honor us. And so in 2020, or shortly before 2020, about late 2019, my mentor, Miss Anita Grant, found me on YouTube. And she said to me, Joél, do you realize that the things you're talking about and some of the challenges you've experienced, your YouTube videos are continuing education courses that professionals can take and earn credit for. But most importantly, it's going to impact the way they're able to care for those that you're trying to advocate for, which are people of color. And thank God I listened to her. And so I began teaching classes, and God, the universe, the ancestors were pleased. And so when the world was mourning the death and the murder of George Floyd, an opportunity opened for us to have a real conversation about racism and death care and how this white male dominated industry had to start making changes to accommodate those that had set the standard, those enslaved people that were caring for your soldiers and sending your soldiers back home during the Civil War and throughout history. You have to start having a conversation and taking us into consideration. And so my seat at the table was opened and I took it and ran with it. And thus the Multicultural Death and Grief Care Academy. And so now we have conversations not just about hair care and cosmetic care and skin care and the way that our bodies react to different chemicals and how that can cause that darkening or how that can be traumatic for someone to see their loved one with a crooked wig and just not presented back in a way that's peaceful and aesthetically pleasing for them. We now have conversations about faith and religion. Again, not everyone's Christian, not everyone's Catholic, and not everyone's Jewish. We have conversations about bias and about prejudice and about racism. And we're in the process of bringing on more voices and representation onto our team because my voice is not the only voice that matters. Yes, I'm a Black woman and I have these skills, but there are entire communities that still don't have voices in our industry. Our mission is to give people a platform to talk about the things that matter at the end of life and in death and in grief.
What do you wish that more people understood about the science of death care?
Again, I wish that people really understood that when you entrust someone with the care of your loved one, that is not a responsibility or a choice or decision to be taken lightly. I don't think people understand that just like you, when let's say you get a diagnosis and you get a second opinion, right? Because you can. You don't have to go with the funeral home that's closest to you just because they're there. You have the right and the power and the authority to ask questions. Have you cared for someone of my faith before? And if you haven't, are you willing to learn and accommodate what we need? Have you cared for a person of color before? There was this when I was in Atlanta in mortuary school, there was this horrible accident on Easter morning where a family of 5 was killed because someone ran into the back of them and pushed them into oncoming traffic at a stoplight. And our instructor talked about how unique she and her team actually cared for the family. She talked about how unique this family was because someone in that family, even amongst that tragedy or within that tragedy, had the wherewithal to say, there's going to be a lot of press around this. There's going to be a lot of attention on this story, not just because it's our family, but because of the horrific nature of the way they died. And we don't just want to go to any funeral home. We want a funeral home that knows how to handle this. We want a funeral home that knows how to care for us and not get caught up in the limelight. And so they interviewed about 4 funeral homes before making their selection. And they did not go with what the obvious choice was. And I'm not going to say the name of that firm, but they didn't go with the obvious choice at the time. They went where they felt most received and cared for. And I don't think people realize they have that power. As far as the science is concerned, I just wish people knew how much care, attention, and detail we have to as funeral service professionals, and more so my colleagues now and other professionals that are in this work, because I no longer work in a funeral home full time. I'm 100% dedicated to my academy. But there's so much education and so much, like I can show you my bookshelf over here. Like that is like a window into the knowledge that over the years I've collected. And this is a small one. I have 4 big ones in the front. But I share that to like not to brag, but this is an ongoing practice. People's bodies are changing. People's size of their bodies are changing. Talk about technology. We've been introduced to nanotechnology, which is being implanted into our bodies. And so we as professionals are now going to have to learn and maybe even as a society redefine what death is because of this nanotechnology and how to care for a micro robot being in someone who is going to be cremated and how to find that nano robot so that it doesn't cause an explosion in the retort. And is a person really dead because this robot is still working? Their consciousness just isn't there anymore. And so death care is ever evolving, but that means that the professionals that do this work are ever evolving as well. And I don't think we get enough credit, honestly, for what we do. I had the honor of working with my mentor, Miss Anita Grant, on what was called the COVID-19 Oral History Project for the Library of Congress, where they put out a solicitation and wanted to capture the stories of how different industries responded to the pandemic. And so she and I had the honor of interviewing about 30 funeral directors who were in the trenches during that time from across the country in various capacities and capturing their stories. And during that time, like it was such an honor to work on this project because during that time, I remember hearing everything about nurses and doctors, and they got the shine, which they deserved. But here's the thing, not everybody that got sick went to the hospital, but everybody that died during the pandemic had to go through the funeral home. Who do you think took care of them? Who do you think put their life on the line? We put our lives on the line to serve families during that time. And not that we need credit for the work that we do, but it was so fulfilling as someone who worked during that time to give other funeral service directors and embalmers and morticians their flowers for the work that they did do because we did not get it during the pandemic. Doctors could go to Starbucks and get free coffee. We couldn't. And I'm not saying that to hate on the doctors. I'm just saying it's the truth.
I understand that. Not get the credit for it or not be seen for it definitely makes you feel a certain way.
It does. And a lot of funeral directors died. A lot of funeral directors committed suicide. A lot of funeral directors left the industry. A lot of people sacrificed a lot. A lot of funeral directors lost family members and weren't even able to go and celebrate the lives of their loved ones, of course, because of travel restrictions, but because they were exposing themselves to the virus and didn't want to take it back to their families. So it's such an honor to be a part of something that got to tell our story during that time in history, and it'll live forever.
So, with all the heartbreak that you face in your industry, how does science and spirit intersect in your work?
It's all spiritual. Science is so spiritual. Science is saying these unseen things are happening and there is a physical result. How much more spiritual do you get than that? Now, faith and belief system are different, right? So for me, I have faith in God. I believe in the ancestors. I believe in the angels. I believe in the spirit realm. I believe in manifestation. I believe in butterflies. I believe in rainbows. Like, I believe in all these things. They're not, nothing is impossible. But as far as this work and there being so much heartbreak, faith and spirituality do play a huge role in my ability to navigate it, right? Having a belief system that says there's something beyond this. And I believe that I'm playing a role, not necessarily in getting the deceased there, because my work isn't for the deceased. It honors them, but my work essentially is for those of us that are still here. And so the heartbreak part that you talked about isn't so much in the death, it's in the fact that in some ways, maybe I won't get to help everybody, which is why I teach. Because now I get to impact and share what I know in the way that I see things, which you could think is right or wrong, with more people that are impacting more people. Yeah. And sometimes it is very heavy work, but more than anything, it's an honor.
Why do you think Western culture, or maybe it's not just Western culture, but why do you think that we fear dead bodies so much? And how can we find a way of shifting that perspective for ourselves to not find dead bodies as frightening or as scary as we might think they are?
It's because we've been taught to. That's the plain answer. And we can go back to being enslaved people. Our slogan and mantra at the Multicultural Death and Grief Care Academy is that culture is the medicine for grief. I also believe culture is the medicine for the fear of death. And so, how can we move forward and maybe not have that be the case? I would encourage every able minded adult or person to begin to research your culture, your history, your lineage. And I'm not just talking about your mom and your grandma, I'm talking about doing some real deep diving into your history, your personal history. What are their belief systems about death? How do they interact with the dead? And I can almost guarantee you that they interact with the dead very closely, whether in spirit or in physical.
I so appreciate you talking to me today. Is there anything else that you feel like you want to add that we missed, or anything that you want to close us off with?
I do think it would be irresponsible to not talk about the spirit and the science of being connected to people once they have crossed on. Some people refer to that as mediumship or ghosts or hauntings or whatever your words are. And to piggyback off that last answer, I don't believe that the connection to our loved ones ends with death. I believe it takes on a new form, a new language, a new system. And a lot of times it's up to us to learn how to navigate those things and do with that information what you wish.
And that's really a beautiful bridge, because next week we are talking to a medium. You are amazing. Where can people find you if you want to be found?
I am the Grave Woman everywhere. You can visit thegravewoman.com or just type in the Grave Woman on Google and I will pop up on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, wherever you go. I'm everywhere.
Amazing. You are absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for talking to me and helping to expand people's minds, shift people's perspectives. I know that people are going to absolutely love not just this episode, but love you.
Oh.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. This has been amazing. And thank you and your sisters for doing the amazing work that you're doing. I know it is like, I'm giving you my Cat Williams judge. This is going to make ripples in the universe.
Yes, from your lips to goddess's ears, baby. I told you that was going to be quite the ride. So far in this perspective shift on death, dying, and the afterlife, we've gone from caring for the dying and preparing for death in weeks 1 and 2, when we sat down with Kim Stravers to talk about the practical side of dying. And this week, of course, Joél walked us through the signs of death and what happens when our bodies die. Next week, we'll move into the energetic perspective on death with medium Rachel Arambazio. We're going to explore what happens to our energy, our consciousness, and our soul when we cross over, and we'll seek to answer the question, does the afterlife really exist? I promise you will not want to miss it. If you love the show, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. This is the Hanged Woman podcast, where perspective is power. We'll be back next week. Until then, hang in there, Seeker.